Thank you, Ali. It is such a pleasure to be here with all of you. I think I see more friends in this audience than most audiences I get to even be a participant in. So thank you all for coming. And, you know, I have a Plato quote, too. Yes, and I found I wasn't going to use it until you said this. But this is what Plato said: be kind, for everyone you meet is fighting a harder battle than you might know. So I'm going to try to help you, to share with you what I've learned from Ron Howard, the power of being receptive, which is very similar to the science of being kind, as Plato has. So how do we link that? Now, do I have a clicker? Oh, yes. Yes, and so it's really about serendipity, right? So what I learned from Ron Howard about being receptive. And just to put a little structure around this, my husband said I have to have structure, which I usually do not. Lessons of from Ron, getting the people part right, are something I call the perceptory system, which I'll explain briefly, and then the channels of communication. So I also was very mesmerized when I came here to Stanford 32 years ago, and an unlikely event occurred. Ron received me as his master student advisee when he wasn't even taking advisees. And when I went back home and they asked me, what happened to you? I said, a Ron Howard happened to me. And I think many of you know what that means. But this is a little poem that I wrote that I wanted to start with. So Ron, when you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you ask real questions of your students, and I learned what teaching was. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you be generous with your time and attention, and I learned this was our best allocation of our most precious resources. When you thought I wasn't looking, you responded to my comment, Ron, you can't afford to spend so much time with me, with, I can't afford not to. And I learned that I mattered. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you being honest, and I learned that finding and telling our truth was our largest contribution, not agreeing with others, but offering our difference. When you thought I wasn't looking, I came to you remorse one time when I thought I had crossed the line of expectations in a university-wide gathering, and you saw and declared it was my finest hour. And I learned the treasure that lay beyond expectations. When you thought I wasn't looking, I saw you add unique insight, and I learned that difference is actually what's valuable, not similarity. So, it turned out in 1986-87, there was this report. Do you still have these reports? And in this year, they picked 2 students to interview, and they had to get, in 2 students, they had to get a graduate student and an undergrad, a man and a woman, and a minority and a majority. And I was one of those 2. And I had a long conversation with them, and they summarized our whole conversation with this. My favorite part of decision analysis is communication. You can justify decisions by looking back at the numbers, but you have to talk to people to get answers. To find out what really matters to them, you have to know how to ask and how to listen. And 14 years later, that's what I got my doctorate in. How to be. How are we being when we're making our decisions, when we're thinking? So I thought I'd take us a little quickly through that. These were some guiding questions about not just how to think individually, but how do we think about making decisions in an organization. So these are some questions, and I'll just briefly highlight these. Why were brilliant ideas and people being prematurely dismissed? Have you ever experienced that? You're offering difference, and you're being shut out initially. Why do I perform differently with different people? Have you noticed that you're able to talk to somebody, and you're surprised at what's coming out of your own mouth, and then you walk across the hall, and you can't put a sentence together? Has anybody ever experienced that? So I wanted to find out what was at the bottom of that. What's controlling this? How do our perceptions actually work? And how do we update our beliefs, and how do we learn? We sometimes confuse learning with confirming. And that's a big error that we're making. And finally, how can numerical minorities or new ideas gain their very first supporter? That's about initiation, not conformity. So that's an engineer, right? So there are two pieces, I think. One is deciding, which is changing how we think. And I don't know if this is a fair summary, but what do you think? I'll look to you all. It's about determining an optimal allocation of resources. And uncertainty is what makes this hard. And so I think Ron has gotten us not just to tolerate and be okay with uncertainty, but to actually embrace it. And the second part, but the requirement of this is I have to actually be willing to be wrong. Does that make sense? The second piece is actually acting, working with others in an organization. And what we're essentially doing is we're trading the status quo for an upgrade to it. It's allocating those resources. And why is this hard? Because we're moving into this land of difference. And so that became what my focus was. How can I handle and receive difference, not similarity? The requirement, I have to be willing to change. So, getting the people part right. This is one of my students actually sent this to me. Which I think is correct. She said, that's what you're doing. Okay. Did you see that, Ron? Did you see it? Okay. Oh, here, it says, I don't want you to miss it. Dear God, please give me the wisdom to deal with people, because if you give me strength, I will hit them. Okay. All right. And it's about communication. You've heard that actions speak louder than words, right? But I found that there's something that speaks even louder than actions, and that's something I call intentions. So it's our intention. So let me give you two sentences that have the exact same words, and you tell me if you receive a difference. A woman without her man is nothing. And a woman without her man is nothing. Right? So it can't be about the words, right? What we really communicate is our intentions. So we're going to take a deep dive in that. They're mostly invisible, okay? In fact, you might feel this way too. That's an excellent suggestion, Triggs. Perhaps another person here would like to make it. So here I am, a different other, offering something, and it's basically not received. So this problem can show up in many ways. How do I get out of the box that other people have put me in? How do these ideas initially get heard? A vicious cycle arises. This is a catch-22 situation. Ideas and people first must prove worthy to gain attention, but proving worthy actually requires that very attention. So how do you get out of that one? So these are if we don't break through this perceptual barrier, we get into what's called a negative self-fulfilling prophecy. So this is my favorite quote, coming from the giant I was standing on. He probably doesn't even know he said this to me. Most oversights in decision-making come from errors in perception rather than errors in logic. Do you remember that?
That's why you have students.
Anyway, I ran with this. Okay? So you may experience yourself this self-fulfilling prophecy. So if you are the target of positive expectations, you can seemingly do no wrong. And if you are the target of negative expectations, you can seemingly do no right. Have you experienced that? Yeah? Okay. So my mom sent me this. Why is it if you don't like someone, the way he holds his spoon can make your skin crawl, but if you do like him, he can turn his plate over in your lap and you won't mind a bit. So we treat each other differently, and we are at high risk of missing great contributions if we don't expect them. So let me show you how that works. And these are some of the, so what we end up trying to do is get people to change. I want to elicit your best contribution. How can I make you ready to change? But we're often met with, don't tell me what to do. Okay? So do you see the problem? Okay. So this is part of my dissertation that I thought I'd put in it. They said research. And so I found one article in all of the ones that I read that had an experiment that failed. And I read about the experiment that failed, and I got this idea. So the self-fulfilling prophecy was about holding a high expectation or a low expectation about a student. And lo and behold, at the end of the school year, the high expected students performed well, and the low expected students performed poorly. But in this case, they also told the teachers whether the student was an extrinsic learner or an intrinsic learner. And what do you think happened to the results of that experiment. They were assuming and hypothesizing that the high performers were going to perform highly. That makes sense, right? But we had these low performers who were modifiable, is the term, ready to be helped by their teacher. So that caused the teacher to help these students. So that caused the low performers to perform well. Does that make sense? So all of a sudden, this is a window to an amazing opportunity. So even if other people think badly of me, what's my best response to that? What do you think? Yes. So this becomes our superpower. So and it's got what would happen if I could just be modifiable? What if they don't know that I'm an extrinsic learner? I don't have to be an extrinsic learner. I can just be ready to receive their contributions independent of what they think of me. Have you tried this? Okay. It's easy to understand and it's very hard to do, so I just wanted to take us through some of the ideas of how to do this. Does anybody have questions about this particular idea? Is that clear enough? Okay. So, in fact, I did a little study on it, and I found stochastic dominance, it turns out. So in every situation, this blue line was, I called it learning, I'm willing to learn, right? Versus proving. And in every context, whatever I was doing, if I was willing to learn, I would engage the participation, the best participation of everybody, and we would end up with the best result. So I studied this thing called organizational misbehavior, is what I call it. And we're always going to be in a situation where people are going to hold incorrect expectations of us, but at the same time, we're going to hold incorrect expectations of them. So we're always going to be in this mess. One person looks upon another fairly anyway. That's from Medea. Okay? And that's because we're entrapped by our own rigid hold. I'm more interested in making the situation turn out to be as I predicted, instead of learning something new in it. And that's the choice. I call that my big decision. And I call it, this is a perceptory system. And again, we'll misinterpret it. It's kind of an embedded problem. Because if somebody tells me that I'm wrong, what do? What would we do? We would ignore them. And then if they persisted, I would come up with some other egregious comment about them, right? And we spend a lot of our time doing that, right? Instead of just learning. We don't have to agree with them, but we can be affected by them. So here's, in one slide, social psychology. Our information processing is selective because we see what we're looking for. If you have a hammer, all you see are nails. That's called bias assimilation. Additionally, we encode, so we interpret what we expected. So what happens if you're a professor and you have a poor student and your student gets 100% on your test? What do you think of the student? He cheated. So he's still a poor student, right? So I'm rigidly holding on to that, and that's not changing. And there's nothing that student can do to change my mind on that. So additionally, he's a cheater, or the test was too easy, or I'm a good teacher. Okay? So, fact number 2, what are we focused on? We usually put into our behaviors, right? So if I don't think somebody knows the answer to a question, I would ask it this way. You don't know the answer to the question, do you? Right? Or I might not even ask you. Or, do you see what I'm doing? But what if I wanted to know? Then I'd say, do you happen to know the answer to this question? Or somebody who does. Do you see how what I exchange is going to be different based on what I'm focused on? Whether rigidly holding on to my expectations or moving in the direction of what I want. So we affect each other. And does anybody have a guess at fact number 3? It's kind of embedded. We routinely forget facts 1 and 2. Okay? And that's what makes this hard. So we're not rational people, actually. We're rationalizing people. And if I didn't believe it, it's more likely I never would have seen it. So we've got to kind of get ourselves out of this trap, our learning trap. So I have a couple of examples here for us. So let's see. How many F's do you see in this box below? And I'm just going to, if you could quickly look. 1 minute, okay. How many? Okay. How many people see more than 3? Okay, a lot. Okay. If I did it to you this way, in reverse order, how many would you see? 6. Now let's turn it around to the first way. Do you see those 3? And now you see the 6. And you don't have a thing against Fs, right? Okay, so we are trying to be able to see what's in front of us more clearly, and we can make up all kinds of stories when we encounter discrepant information, like when we hit a telephone pole, the telephone pole was approaching me, and I was attempting to swerve out of its way when it struck my front end. Okay? But we also know that we can surmount this if we choose to shift our focus. So we can just read this, right? Can you read that? Yeah? Okay, so what are you doing? Are you judging the misspelled words? Or are you going for meaning? See that? So it's all in us to be receptive. But we do have to train our muscles to do that. And that's become what I've been working on for the last 25 years. And I think it is, and I'm going to slip through this. Here's my last exercise here. Do you happen to have an opinion of which horizontal line is longer? How many people think they're the same? Oh, look at that. We should have a camera. Okay, so all of you guys who just raised your hands, are you also thinking, doesn't she know we've seen this before? See? And that's the extra work I'm telling you you don't have to do, okay? But my response would be, have you seen it with me in this auditorium? Right? So you think you're seeing it, right, and making a decision. You're intaking it and you're judging it instead. Now, you didn't do that with the words just before, right? But you're doing it with this. You see how pervasive this is? So it turns out I manipulated it a little bit. Okay? I like this summary. So this is a pretty hard problem, right? And I think it matters. This matters because this is how we're going to offer decision analysis to the world. It's not actually just good enough to come up with a better solution, but how can we bring other people along with us to even make it better? So I wanted to just skip. So I have 30 seconds? 0. Okay. I will end with this. There's a difference between saying the dessert is very good and I enjoyed it very much. Do you have any questions? Or what questions do you have? Do you feel a difference? You can come to my party if you have to. Or it's important that you be there. And sorry I'm late. Thank you for waiting. And thank you, Ron.